Welcome to the Generation Ziegler's Gen Z Show. I'm your host, James McLamb, and today I'm joined with two good friends of mine from Arkansas, Mr. Zachary Andrews. How are you doing, Zachary?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. And back for another guest hosting with us from Minnesota, the Great White North, Maddie Smith. How are you, Maddie?
I'm doing well, enjoying the nice weather up here.
Yeah, we're all kind of bracing for a change in the weather. It is warm in the south, and if it's warm in Minnesota, then it's warm across the nation. So we're bracing. So today's guest is Justin Mears, and we were discussing before the call. This is a person that you may have never heard of before, but after this call, you're not going to forget. Zachary, tell the audience just a little bit about who Justin is.
Justin he's so unique. I mean, he's been reading leadership books since he was in middle school. He went and was in the Navy, was a helicopter pilot, and now he owns a Chick-fil-A. And really, we just get to hear a little bit about how all these experiences have added up.
Yeah, someone who not only was in the Navy, but an instructor at the Naval Academy. Man, this guy's got leadership experience you would not believe. Maddie, what are some of the takeaways that you got from our time with Justin today?
Yeah, he really talked about how do you express your values versus what are those skills. I think it's really easy for us to focus on how can I become better, how can I become a better public speaker, how can I organize a meeting better, how can I execute these skills in a better way. But he really focused on and gave us some specific examples of how to really focus on your character and how that influences everything else that we may be currently focused on.
So Gen Z audience, you're going to really love this conversation with Justin Mears as we really dive into a deeper discussion on what is the importance of character in leadership. So let's go straight to the show with Justin Mears. Justin, welcome and thank you for joining us on the Gen Z Show. It's really nice to meet you, and I appreciate your willingness to come on our show and share your thoughts on leadership with our Generation Ziegler audience.
Absolutely. James, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure, as we would say at Chick-fil-A. So thanks for having me on the call. I'm excited. Anytime I get the chance to, not that I don't love slinging chicken, but anytime I get the chance to step away for a few minutes and talk about leadership is a good day, whether it's with my team or anybody else. So I'm happy to be here and happy to share some thoughts. And I think most excited just to hear the questions that y'all have and kind of where that takes the conversation. And just see what's on your mind today. So.
Well, anybody who knows much about the Gen Z Show knows that we're big fans also of Chick-fil-A here. We got Randy Gravitt, who has been our guest multiple times on this show, even when this was an open format, which we did before. We did live Zoom calls on Facebook. He was one of our first guests that did that, and we've been big fans of Mark Miller's books. And The Heart of Leadership especially, I think, is one of the finest examples of a text on leadership development that I've ever read. It's really sticky. I really love that. So I'm a big fan. And I have two children who are Chick-fil-A employees, so I like that as well. So
yeah.
Well, our audience, this may be the first time that they've met you. So just introduce yourself to our Gen Z audience and just tell them a little bit about what you would like for them to know.
Absolutely. My name is Justin Mears. I'm from a small town in South Carolina called Georgetown, South Carolina. It's right between Charleston and Myrtle Beach. That's where I was born and raised, on the coast there. I think that growing up in a small town certainly shaped and influenced, who I became or who I am today, who I'm becoming still. There's a long story there, but the end result is I chose to go to the Naval Academy for my undergraduate education. So went there. And really for me, I've been reading leadership books since I was in the 7th grade, and I always tell people that's a really weird thing. I know that most 7th grade kids aren't reading John Maxwell books, but my dad, was really big into reading leadership and management books. That's one of the reasons I was super happy to be invited to be on this show. Zig Ziglar was one of the guys that my dad always pushed to me as a young kid, and so I kind of just picked it up in middle school and high school, and I went to the Naval Academy because everybody called it a leadership laboratory. And I was like, well, if this is a leadership laboratory, then that's the place I want to go. I want to, continue to study and learn and work on becoming the leader that I'm, feel like I'm meant to be. And so that's kind of how I ended up there. It was not really a military or necessarily a patriotic decision initially for me. And everybody goes for different reasons, to a place like that. But the service aspect really kind of came later, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I went because people said this is where you can learn to be a leader. And so I was like, all right, sign me up. Led to, a rude awakening initially, perhaps when you first show up there and all the military aspects of everything. But yeah, the service piece kind of came later for me. After graduating from the Naval Academy, I met my wife there. We both went on to flight school. I was a helicopter pilot in the Navy for a little over 10 years. So 2 deployments over to the Middle East, the Persian Gulf area, in Bahrain with my helicopter squadron. And then after I got done with my first sea tour and flying, I chose to go back to the Naval Academy to be a leadership instructor. So a lot of the same reasons that led me back there. My favorite classes when I was when I was a student, I was a midshipman, were in the leadership department. And I thought it would be really cool to be able to go back, having had the opportunity for 5 or 6 years to be an officer in the Navy and to lead, sailors, and actually kind of put this stuff into practice that I had been reading about and studying and trying to learn and go back and try and teach it. And one of the reasons why I did that, just real quick, is I really learned in my time flying and leading a crew and leading a division of sailors that I had done a really good job of once again, of reading books on leadership, of learning, of teaching myself to be a reflective person, to be a critical thinker, and to, I think be a decent leader. But I had not done a good job of passing that on. And so I know we'll get into some of that kind of stuff down the road, but I had kind of taken it on myself, like this is important to me. And as an officer in the Navy, it should be important to other officers, but I wasn't necessarily willing to share that with others. And that's not a good thing. And I had not learned how to teach leadership or how to really be a leader who develops other leaders. And so that's a main reason why I went back to the academy, was I got to spend 3 years teaching and refining kind of my approach, my take on a lot of things, but learning how to communicate that to other future leaders. And yeah, that was just important to me to do that. That led into kind of the end of my time in the Navy. And in that last year or so, after I had been finished teaching at the academy, I decided I wanted to write a book. So I started that journey. It took me about 2 years to write that book. It's called The Coin. It's a parable format, much like Pat Lencioni or John Gordon or any of those guys that kind of use a fable or parable format to teach leadership. And so it tells the story of a young business leader and his kind of journey and kind of discovery that he's been put in these leadership positions as a young man, but really doesn't understand what it means to lead, doesn't understand the complexity of leadership and what it kind of requires. And he goes on this journey, and he gets to travel back in time and meet a bunch of different or witness a bunch of different moments, historical moments, spanning from, political leaders like Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, to military leaders, to sports leaders, and kind of gets a chance to witness firsthand some specific leaders throughout history exhibiting specific traits, characteristics that are important for, I believe, are important for a leader to embody. And then ultimately it's following his journey of discovery of what that means for him and his role. And it says right there on the cover of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything, but it's called A Leader's Developing Leaders Parable. And back to kind of the point I was just making, like that's what led me to write that, was this idea that that's what we should be doing. We should be leaders developing leaders, not leaders holding on to whatever we've learned. And so I wrote that. Throughout that time, I was in the process to be selected to become a Chick-fil-A operator. And so that took me about 3.5 years to get to that point. It was a long process, a long journey, but got selected in February of this year, pre-COVID. And who knew, right, that like the journey that I was going to take from getting selected in February to opening a restaurant in mid-September in the middle of, the pandemic and all of that and everything that went into that and our own challenges we faced with that in the restaurant already and only being open for the past 6 weeks or so. But that's what I'm doing now. So I work with no shortage of Gen Z young people. I got about 100 of them on my staff or on my team. So
this was a brand new store?
Brand new, yes, sir, out in Lacey, Washington. Yeah. So brand new, just opened up. Yes, about 6 weeks ago, September 17th, we opened up.
So you've not had anyone, I would assume, in your dining room at all?
We have not. No, we're drive-through only right now, which is honestly a blessing in disguise in some ways, where we just kind of can focus on one element of serving guests at this point and get better at that. We got a long ways to go, but the team's getting better every day.
Well, one of the things that, when we were talking about Chick-fil-A's leadership components that Mark Miller talks about in his Heart of Leadership, describing leaders and the training of leaders, he uses the analogy, of an iceberg, and that most of the iceberg is underneath the water, and most of a leader's training is underneath the surface, which he focuses on character. And I know that is something that through watching the videos and reading some of the things that you have put out, that is really a focus of you, is focusing on character first. Why is that important to you, based on your experiences, on why leadership should be focused on character? Because I'll be honest, the three of us, Zachary, Maddie, and I, we've all been through leadership trainings, and they tend to focus most of the time first on the skills and the how-to, not the person in there. Why do you feel like we need to start there with character?
I think that it impacts the how-to, the why behind it, or the motivation behind the how-to comes from, who you are as a person and what your focus is. And you can go back to the ancient Greeks, right? Like, you can go look at some of those guys and their focus on virtue ethics, and this idea of character, and where we get the English word character, how we understand character, comes from the Greek word character, which means the engraving of a coin, which is why I call my book The Coin. Not to spoil it for Zachary there, who said he's reading it, but it is this idea that you take a piece of metal and it has shape and it has form, but until you etch into it these identifiable features that communicate to everybody else around, like what the value of that piece of metal is, right? That's what engraving a coin does. If I show you a quarter, that quarter is worth 25 cents here. And so before, it was just a piece of metal. We etch these identifiable features that showcase to everyone around, what it's worth, and that our character is the same way, that it is those individual pieces of us, the sum of which, we're demonstrating to everyone around us what our value is, what we bring to the table. And so I think that, I just think that is where you have to start. I honestly don't think there's, in my opinion, that you can't just jump right into here is how to, if you don't get to the root of the why behind that, and the things that are important, that I think that the character is the sum of our moral habits, if you will. And so those are things that you're practicing and you're learning and developing, just like you would physical habits, right? Flying a helicopter, a lot of it became like muscle memory, or if you've played sports before, right? This idea of muscle memory, you do something repetitive over and over and over again, and it becomes habit. And that our character is the same way. It's the sum of all these little pieces that make up our moral habits, and we are developing this moral muscle memory, that when push comes to shove and you're put into a situation that requires you to react in accordance with that character and those habits that you developed, you're going to do what you've done over and over again. I used to tell my midshipmen all the time, when I was teaching at the academy, along the same lines, this idea that like, hey, you're learning all this great skills on how to be a leader here. But if you don't have the character piece figured out, there's no magic switch that you flip on graduation day and all of a sudden now you're an officer in the Navy or the Marine Corps and you've been letting the character piece slide. And then all of a sudden you're going to turn a light switch on and poof, you're going to become this amazing officer. It doesn't work that way. You've been building habits, good or bad, throughout your life, certainly throughout your time here at the academy. And those are the things that are going to shine through when you're faced with a stressful situation or put into a position where you're backed into a corner and you have to make a tough decision. The how-tos are only going to get you so far. It's going to be a lot of those pieces of your character that are going to shine through in how you approach situations and things like that. And some of these things I think are not natural in some ways, like the idea of love and talking about love when it comes to leadership and like truly caring for someone and putting their interests ahead of your own. That requires sacrifice sometimes. That requires serving other people and putting them before yourself. And I think that our natural inclination is to do the opposite and say, well, what's in it for me? And if you're talking about being a leader and your focus is what's in it for me, because your character is rooted in selfish habit, then that stuff's going to naturally come out when you're put in a situation where potentially the right decision as a leader requires sacrifice on your part and could backfire and could cause you could be negative for you personally, but is right for your team. And you have to be able to stand up as a leader and do that. And that's tough to do if you don't have the character piece figured out. Sorry if that was a long answer, but.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm curious. So you're kind of joking around saying like, I started reading leadership books when I was in 7th grade. And then you talk about how you decided to go to the military or the Navy. So I'm curious, how did your interpretation of leadership change from when you started the Navy versus when you came out?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. If we're talking the Naval Academy and we're talking like my undergraduate education, I kind of alluded to it, but it was this idea of the importance of service. And I think that becomes like interwoven throughout my personal journey now. And that's because of going to the Naval Academy. I think I distinctly remember going in my dad's bedroom one night. And I had applied to the Naval Academy in Clemson, and we were a diehard Clemson family. My dad went there, my brother went there, my sister went there. I got my MBA from there literally just to say I was a Clemson graduate, really for no other reason.
I'm in school there, by the way. So.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, I mean, like so I walked to my dad's bedroom one night and I was like, I got accepted to both. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to go to the Naval Academy. And he was like, are you going to pay for going to Clemson? And, he just kind of jokingly, but he was like, you're going to the Naval Academy, it's free. But that decision, if I had gone to Clemson, that the service component, I don't know if it would have ever kind of entered in. And that's really what I learned, was the importance of putting other people before yourself or an ideal or a cause ahead of your own personal interests. And so that grew and took place there. Once again, I didn't go there with that intent, whereas a lot of kids do. And like, it's great on them for kind of having that forethought as a 17, 18-year-old kid to go to this place because of the idea of service. That wasn't it for me. I would say I was a pretty selfish individual as a teenager. And so I was going because it looked really good. No one else in my school was going to a military academy. I was going because, this can help me be a leader. And so it was a real big shift from me focused to others focused. And I think that continued throughout my time actually in the Navy. Yeah.
Were there...
So Justin, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Zachary.
Kind of just going off of that though. And I mean, obviously the Navy played a huge part in your development, but whenever we're talking about like the strong character that it takes to be a leader, how can we transfer that onto others and help them develop their own personal character? Like, from your experiences, how is that most effective? Yeah, I mean, if you're talking like actual practical things to do, for me, one of the first things I do with anybody that I'm working with is, and this is something that the Travis Mannion Foundation does,
is the values and action survey. I can't remember what, I think it's, I don't want to say, I think it's Michigan, but I'm not sure what school kind of originated this, but it's under this idea of positive psychology. You can read, there's the Positive Psychology Center at Wharton and those sorts of things that are studying this idea of positive psychology, and it kind of falls in line with that. But it's a quick assessment that you can take that breaks down the kind of top 21 character strengths. So it's a strengths-based assessment for your character. And what it does is it's an assessment, you answer questions just like if you've done like an MBTI personality assessment or anything like that, DISC, any of these. And it shows you how you prioritize 1 through 21, these top 21 character strengths. And they arrived at these 21 strengths, from my understanding, by doing a multi-year study looking at basically, human literature from beginning to now and trying to see are there traits and characteristics that kind of transcend no matter kind of where you are in the world and those sorts of things that are important to the human race. And these are the 21 that they arrived at. And it tells you how you prioritize from 1 to 21. I believe it's 21. And so I have people do that. But then I tell them, hey, that's great. But just because humor is my dead last, right? Humor is 21 for me. That doesn't mean I'm not a funny person. Doesn't mean I don't like, I don't joke around. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means I prioritize that less than all these other character strengths. It also doesn't mean that my number one is humility. It doesn't mean that that's always necessarily a good thing. I may over prioritize that. And so Aristotle and some of the Greeks would say that these pieces of your character, I operate ideally along this golden mean. There is like a perfect spot where humility is a virtue, and in and of itself, it is good. But you can have too little, or you can have too much of all of these character strengths. So take bravery, for example. Bravery would be considered, I think, a cardinal virtue, right? We all want to be considered brave individuals. We know that a deficiency of bravery would be, being a coward. No one wants to be called a coward. But an excess of bravery would be being too brash or taking on too much risk and, unnecessarily. You can have too much of that as well. So they all operate in this golden mean. And so I tell people, take this assessment, and then I give them a worksheet that basically goes from excess of deficiency to excess of, too much, to too little on each of these character strengths. And I say, I want you to fill this out, and I want you to assess yourself. Now that you kind of know what the VIA survey says, the values and action survey says for how you prioritize these, I want you to say, where do you fall on this spectrum of from too little to too much? And then I want you to take this to someone who knows you really well, whether it's a friend, in my case, like a spouse or whoever. Have them do it for you too. Make sure those match up, because sometimes you may think too highly of yourself or too little of yourself. Make sure you kind of get a good idea of where you fall out. And then on either side of the spectrum, whether it's, for me, like honestly, like humility is number one, and it's always going to show up at the top, and then people can be like, great, like you're a humble person, but that has been at my detriment at times. And so that is something that I want to work on. So then identify 2 or 3 of those character strengths and try and map out like, hey, this is where I carry this to excess. And so how can I create a playbook, if you will, for when I'm putting in these moments and it requires some critical thinking to say, hey, I know this is where I'm naturally inclined to react, but I also know that it is proven to be a negative thing for me at times. And here's how I'm going to try and act, the next time this comes up. And that's the only way you change habits is by, right, whether moral or physical or whatever, is by repeated action. And so trying to identify what that action looks like, when it's going to come into play, and how you need to change that, and then doing it. I mean, that's kind of as practical as I can explain it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. And, I really think that a lot of times kind of whenever you're working with people to get them, to grow as a leader and as a person, like there's also the aspect of, they have to want it. And I can definitely see how whenever you help them develop like a roadmap to it, that definitely is easier to make them want it. And that kind of ties it back in for me though, because like James said earlier, I know Maddie, James, and I, we have been trained heavily on the skill side of leadership and less probably on the character side. I kind of see how you can grow, help someone grow, and help yourself grow by kind of the same way. You're just focusing on different things. So I think that's really unique.
Yeah,
Justin,
no,
why do you think that so much youth development training, leadership training seems to focus on the how-to and not really the why? I know it's changing. I mean, that's my job, is to notice this type of stuff. I know that we seem to be changing that, but it doesn't seem to filter down as much into those high school ranks to young people working with Gen Z. So why do you think that? Why do you think they focus first so much on the hows and not really developing the character of it?
Well, my initial kind of reaction to that is it's easier. It's easier to focus on the how-to and just say, hey, let's focus on some of these skills and competencies. It's always easier than that on that side. Stephen Covey's book, Speed of Trust, he really talks about that he says trust is equal parts competency and character. And so he makes this assertion that no one would want to get in a helicopter with me if they didn't think I could actually fly the helicopter and get them where they needed to go, right? Like, there is an element of competency and skill required when it comes to trust and who I am as a leader in order to execute the mission. But they're also not going to get in the helicopter with me if they don't trust my intentions and they don't think that I have their best interest at heart or the interest of the mission at heart. And if they have seen me do things that are not trustworthy. And that happened quite frequently, where it's like, hey, when push comes to shove, once again, this person is going to always look out for themselves, and therefore they're willing to throw me under the bus. They're willing to lie about what happened on this flight in order to preserve their own self-interest and whatever the next promotion is or job they want. And those are hard conversations to have with folks. But you're absolutely right. Like, no one in my entire Navy career, no one ever sat down with me once and said, hey, how's your character? Like, how are you doing, on what you name it, on, perseverance. Like, how are you persevering? Like, those are uncomfortable conversations to have. And no one ever did. Plenty of times they sat me down and said, hey, this is where you are falling short as a pilot, like in your flying skills. And those conversations were had all the time, but no one ever sat down with me and said, hey, how's your character? I also think that another aspect of it is it's not as easily quantifiable, right? So it is hard. And I think it is slowly trickling in. You can thank positive psychology study and people out there doing the hard work, trying to actually quantify, like, what do these things look like? These elements, like, what does it actually look like to exhibit these things? Because it's hard to teach something where you can't actually put your finger on it and say, like, hey, this is what this looks like, and this is how this directly leads to, X, Y, and Z when it comes to success as a leader. It's just kind of more out there, I think, is another part of it too. So I think it's a combination of those two things, that it's not easy. It's not as easy. It's difficult conversations required. No one likes being told that they lack integrity or something like that. But it's like, hey, if you don't act in accordance with your values, the things that you profess to be important, then you're not acting as a person of integrity. Like, you are going against this idea of being a whole and complete person. And so I used to tell them my mids too all the time, like, hey, if I tell you lack integrity, no one's going to like that. Like, it's not, and you probably would never say it like that, but hopefully you get the point that, like, it's an uncomfortable conversation, and it's also hard to pinpoint a lot of this stuff.
I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to say you're coaching a young leader that is not being taught this character first training at all. They're just being taught on the skills. Where do you start? What do you tell a young Maddie, a young Zachary, when they're 14, 15 years old and they want to be a better leader of their own, but no one is helping them? Where do they start? How can they start on their own journey? Because here's the thing. We're going to have a lot of listeners to this podcast, a lot of viewers who are like, look, I'm not getting this at school. I'm not getting this from my coach. I'm not getting this from my teacher. I'm not getting this from my pastor. They're talking about other stuff, and I want to develop it. How do I start it on my own?
Well, first thing I would suggest is find some books to read. And it can depend on what your interests are. Like, if you're a sports person, Legacy by James Kerr, following around the New Zealand All Blacks. If you're a sports person, hands down, that's the book to go to start with. or if you're, you like the historical kind of stories and references, The Road to Character by David Brooks, another great book. So there are books out there on this topic to get you kind of thinking on these things. My two kind of starting points would be this. First, I don't think we're a very reflective society in general. And I think that reflection, daily reflection is critical to your ability, especially when you're talking about this stuff like, even the skills side of leadership, but the character side. If you're not self-aware of kind of where you sit, you don't really have a starting point for where to begin to get better. And so I think that is an actual skill, not a character piece. That's a skill piece that people need to develop, is get you a journal. Like I in my book, I have a list of questions, but I have a list of questions for myself that I ask myself kind of every day. That's reflective questions of like, how did I demonstrate love to my family? How does my family know that I love them today? Like, what did I do today that demonstrate that? Well, love is something is a value that is important to me, that is a piece of my character that I want to continue to grow. So that question directly impacts how I'm doing along my journey of trying to become a better leader of character. So I have a series of questions that I ask myself, about 10 questions every day, trying to reflect on those things. So first thing I would say is do something like that. Try and become a more reflective person. It can be as simple as when you're in the shower, just thinking through the day, and then grow it from there, grow that skill, and become a person who takes time every day to think about how you're doing. The second thing I would say is, maybe even before that, is figure out what's important to you. I think that you have to identify the values. That's where the values and action survey can kind of help you, maybe show you how you prioritize things. But I think you need to figure out, what is most important to you? What values do you hold most dear? Because that's going to directly impact the things that you focus on in trying to become a better person of character. And I kind of mentioned integrity there a minute ago. And so another kind of word study here, right? The word integrity comes from the root of the word integer, which we know is a whole number, right? Back from those days of doing math. And it's this idea of being whole and complete. When I was teaching leadership at the Naval Academy, they had a very good definition that I've kind of stuck with for integrity, that is the consistent alignment of your actions with the values and standards that are important to you, essentially. So it's it's consistency in action. So how consistently do my actions align with the things that I say are important? Because I can say humility is important all day, but if I go out and I'm a boastful person and I'm arrogant, and not demonstrating that, then it doesn't matter what I say is important to me. Like, I don't actually value that thing. And so how consistently do I align my actions with my values? And how do I try and make that sum of all of these habits, right? That character sum equal close to that whole number. We're never going to get there. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to get to that one, but you can't get there if you don't know what the values are that you think are important. So that's what I would say. I would say, identify what those are, and then work on becoming a more reflective person and trying to reflect on how you're doing at acting in accordance with those values.
I don't know if y'all caught that or not, but the books that he was suggesting to the audience, they're basically, you're talking about biographies, reading about people's lives and their struggles and how they got from, point A to point B and the revelations that they had about themselves. So read or reflect and determining, what is most important to you, what your values are, the three things that you're suggesting folks start with. Not necessarily in that order, but those are the three things. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
That's going to be good. That's going to be really good.
So one question that I kind of have is, so you said that you started reading leadership books, John Maxwell and stuff, when you were in middle school. So over all the books you've read, what was the one book that you think impacted you the most?
That's a really good question. It's hard not to come back to. Sorry, I'm literally looking over here at my library of books to answer this question. I should have known this would be potentially be a question. Man, that's a really, really hard question to answer, and I think it comes in different seasons. First of all, so I think I think that the season of life that you're in may dictate what's most important to you at that time. I already mentioned legacy. I'm a huge sports guy, and so I actually got to sit down with the head coach and leadership character coach for the New Zealand All Blacks, who are the most successful sports team in history. I don't know where they stand now, but last I kind of knew, over basically a 100-year span, they had an 86% winning percentage. And, you know, we like tout the Golden State Warriors or somebody, Alabama football, Clemson football, right, is like over like a decade maybe they have an 86% winning percentage, and that's like amazing. And this team has that over, you know, a 100-year span. And so this author, James Kerr, got to spend a year with them. I think it was about a year. He got to spend time with them in the lead up to the Rugby World Cup, and following and kind of figuring out like what is it that makes this team so successful. And there is a lot of deep-rooted culture and consistency, and obviously like peak performance. But in the book, and also in the conversation that I got to have with the head coach and the leadership coach there, they came to the Naval Academy. It was like they had a 2-week period in between tryouts for the New Zealand All Blacks and starting training camp. And instead of taking a vacation or something, the coach and the leadership coach for the New Zealand All Blacks took a 2-week vacation, if you will, to the United States to go to the Naval Academy in West Point and a bunch of different places to try and figure out like how can we get 1% better. Wow. And their focus was not on skills. It was not on, they weren't traveling around figuring out what do I need to learn about, you know, performing on the rugby pitch in order to get better. They were focused on character. Like that's what they were focused on. How can we study some other organizations that put an emphasis on character to make sure we have the right people on board our team, that when matched with the skill set that they have will continue to, you know, lead us to be the most successful sports franchise ever. So if you're into sports, that's a really good one, and does focus on the character thing. And it kind of carried me for a couple of years. Along those same lines, though, and if I was kind of given a generic book, it is really hard not to go with Good to Great by Jim Collins, as far as studying what makes good organizations great, what makes great organizations stay great, how do you move from good to great. And there's a lot of things he talks about in that book, but along those same lines, he talks about this idea of kind of pursuing the 1%, and that good is actually good can be the enemy of great. You can get to good and be like, oh, well, this is good enough, and that's, you know, and so that idea of every day trying to look for that way to become 1% better, I think is something that has, if I had to pick something that kind of transcended all of the books I've read and has stuck with me, that'd be a big one. And that, yeah, Good to Great is a really, really good read.
Justin, our audience is going to want to know more about how to get in touch with you. They're going to want to know how to get your book and stuff. Where can they find you? How can they reach out to you? What's the best way for them to connect with you to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in my book, I make it very clear at the back of the book. So the book is called The Coin. Once again, just type in my name in The Coin. You'll find it. It's on Amazon. That's probably the easiest way to get it, you know, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, whatever. But the last page of the book, I have my actual cell phone number in there and my email address. So, you know, feel free to reach out to me. Justin Mears, Mears is my last name. Justin Mears 26@gmail.com is my personal email. So they can reach out to me there. Happy to have a conversation with anybody. Once again, if you get the book, my cell phone number is also in there. So I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime, and you can find me on Facebook or whatever, I guess, if you want. But that'd probably be the easiest way. Yeah.
And eventually they'll be able to go into a dining room and see you behind the counter.
That's true. Yep. Absolutely. Hopefully soon they'll be able to come into the dining room. Right now, if you come to Lacey, Washington, you probably see me in the drive-thru. So.
But Justin, thank you for that. Hey, audience, listen, all the information that he just mentioned is going to be in the show notes. So if you look down, you'll see in the show notes, you'll be able to find all the information that he just listed and links to the book on Amazon. Justin, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for really diving into some topics that these young leaders and I, we've struggled with before, not just not having the skills, but having the why and the why to back up the how. So thank you for your time today.
Thank y'all. Thanks for having me. I definitely, obviously, if you can't tell, I'm passionate about that side of things and think it's important. And I think that I don't just think that because I personally think that. I think that because I think that the Gen Z generation thinks that, right? That's the why, this idea of meaning and purpose and fulfillment and those sorts of things. And so it's another element of that. And I really enjoyed the questions. I think I'm really glad that we asked questions about, like, what does this look like practically? Otherwise, the conversation could have just stayed kind of up there in the clouds. And honestly, I would not have thought to take it there. It wasn't even in my thought path until those questions kind of came up. So thank y'all for asking that, because I think that is, at the end of the day, the important part is, okay, great, this sounds great, but how do I actually, put this into practice? So yeah, thanks for the great questions that led the conversation down that path. So I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And audience, please subscribe and share this episode with your friends and family. And we'll be back next Tuesday with another exciting episode. Thank you, guys.